The invitation had gold foil edges. Sophia noticed that first. How something so beautiful could lead somewhere so ugly. She turned it over in her hands one last time before tucking it into her clutch and stepping out of the car. The Meridian Grand Hotel rose above her like a cathedral, built for people who had never once worried about money. Crystal chandeliers blazed behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Valets in white gloves moved like choreographed dancers. Women in gowns that probably cost more than most people's cars floated through the entrance, trailing perfume and laughter. Sophia smoothed the front of her navy dress. It was elegant, she knew that. But standing here, in front of all of this, it suddenly felt like something bought off the wrong rack. Adrian should be here. Her husband had texted 40 minutes ago. Running late. Go inside. I'll find you. 4 years of marriage had taught her that running late, in Adrian Voss's world, could mean anything from 20 minutes to never. She understood. She always understood. That was perhaps the one thing people never said about the wife of one of the most feared men in the city. That she was patient. Quietly. Stubbornly. Endlessly patient. She walked in alone. The gala was for the Harlow Children's Foundation, a legitimate cause wrapped inside an excuse for the city's elite to congratulate themselves. Tables draped in ivory linen, a string quartet in the corner, waiters gliding with champagne flutes balanced on silver trays. Sophia accepted a glass she didn't plan to drink and drifted toward a display of artwork mounted near the east wall. Crayon drawings, handprints pressed in paint. She smiled at a lopsided sun, drawn by a 7-year-old named Marcus. This was why she'd come, not for the chandeliers. She didn't notice when the group of women first clocked her. There were 4 of them, clustered near the bar like a pride of bored lions. Camille Harlow, 26, daughter of the gala's host, and already 3 glasses into the evening. Beside her, Priya Wentworth, whose father owned half the city's media outlets. Then Jade Sutton, whose engagement ring caught light from across the room, and Becca Stroud, the quietest of the group, but somehow always the cruelest. They noticed Sophia the way predators notice something that doesn't belong. "Who is she?" Jade murmured. "No idea," Camille said, tilting her head. "Catering, maybe? Did they change the uniform?" Priya laughed behind her glass. "She's wearing a clutch, Camille. So, my grandmother carries a clutch. Doesn't mean she belongs here." They watched Sophia for a few minutes, the way they watched everything, with the casual contempt of people who had never once been told they were wrong. Then Camille had an idea. She usually did. They were rarely good ones, but nobody around her had ever been brave enough to say so. "Let's have some fun," she said. It started with a smile. Camille approached Sophia near the artwork wall, with the warmth of someone welcoming an old friend. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, touching Sophia's arm lightly. "One of our guests is having a small wardrobe emergency in the private lounge." "Someone said you were handling the event coordination?" Sophia blinked. "I'm sorry? Aren't you with the venue staff?" "No, I'm a guest." Camille's eyes swept over her. The navy dress, the simple jewelry, the hair Sophia had spent 45 minutes curling into soft waves that now fell past her shoulders. Something shifted behind Camille's smile. Not embarrassment. Amusement. "Oh, how lovely," she said, and her voice had a new texture now, honeyed on top, rotten underneath. "Well, since you're a guest, perhaps you could still help. My friend is really quite distressed. It would only take a moment." Sophia hesitated. She glanced toward the entrance. No sign of Adrian yet. The woman in front of her seemed harmless. Tipsy and overdressed, but harmless. She followed her. The private lounge was down a carpeted corridor, past the coat check, behind a door marked "Staff" and "Invited Guests Only." The moment it clicked shut behind Sophia, she understood she had made a mistake. All four of them were there. The smiles were gone. "Sit her down," Camille said. Later, Sophia would struggle to explain why she didn't scream immediately. Shock, she supposed, the sudden disorienting wrongness of it, like a painting hung slightly crooked that your brain refuses to process for a full second. By the time she found her voice, Priya and Becca had her by the shoulders, and Jade was already pulling something from a bag near the vanity. Hair-cutting shears, actual shears, not scissors, the kind used by professionals, the kind that could take inches off in a single cut. "Wait," Sophia started. "Relax," Camille said, holding up her phone to record. "We're just playing. Don't touch me, please." "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just hair. It grows back. It didn't happen all at once." That was somehow the worst part. It happened in stages. Chunks falling to the carpet, Sophia's voice going from pleading to raw, her hands pushing uselessly against the grip on her shoulders. She could hear them laughing, the specific bright laughter of people who believe they are untouchable. Camille kept the phone steady throughout, narrating like a sportscaster. "Look at her face. Oh my God, this is hilarious." When they finally let go, Sophia stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Uneven patches, long on one side, brutally short on the other. 2 years of carefully grown hair, gone in under 4 minutes. "Don't cry," Jade said, examining her nails. "It's not cute." Sophia didn't cry. She looked at her own reflection and felt something move through her. Not grief, not yet. Something quieter and much, much colder. She picked up her clutch from the floor. She walked out. The quartet was still playing when she passed through the lobby. Nobody noticed the woman with the ruined hair slipping through the front doors and into the night air. Nobody saw her sit on the bottom step of the grand entrance and press her hands against her knees to stop them shaking. She didn't cry out there either. She simply waited, because Adrian was coming, and somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the humiliation and the shock and the unbearable urge to disappear, Sophia almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The black Mercedes turned into the hotel's circular driveway at 9:47 p.m. Adrian Voss was not a man who rushed. He walked at the same measured pace whether he was closing a business deal or handling something that required considerably less paperwork. His suits were always pressed. His expression was always composed. In 20 years of operating in shadows that most people pretended didn't exist, very few things had managed to rattle him. He saw Sophia sitting on the steps and stopped walking, not because it was unusual for her to wait outside, but because Sophia never sat like that. Spine curved inward, shoulders pulled together, like she was trying to make herself smaller than she already felt. She was wearing a scarf. She hadn't been wearing a scarf when he last saw her this morning. He crossed the distance between them without a word. "Hey," he said quietly, crouching in front of her. "Hey." Her voice was steady, impressively steady. That alone told him something was wrong. Sophia was warm, expressive, the kind of woman who greeted him after a long day with actual enthusiasm. This version of her, the flat-voiced, carefully controlled version, was one he had only seen twice before. Both times, something had hurt her badly enough that she'd gone somewhere inside herself to survive it. "What happened?" "Nothing. I'm just tired. Can we go home?" He studied her face. Her eyes were dry, but slightly swollen at the edges. Her makeup, usually simple, had been partially wiped away. Not carelessly, but deliberately, like she'd tried to clean herself up before he arrived. "Sophia, Adrian, please. I just want to go home." He straightened, opened the car door for her, and said nothing more. But when she slid into the seat and the scarf shifted slightly, he saw it. Just a glimpse, the jagged unevenness where long, smooth hair should have been. A rough edge near her jaw, a patch near her temple cut too short, cut badly, cut by someone who hadn't cared about the damage they were doing. He closed the car door. He stood outside for exactly 4 seconds. Then he turned and walked back toward the hotel entrance. Marco, his head of security, was already moving toward him before Adrian said a word. 15 years together had made conversation almost unnecessary between them. "The gala," Adrian said simply. "On it," Marco replied, already pulling out his phone. Inside, Adrian didn't make a scene. He didn't raise his voice or pull anyone aside dramatically. He simply walked to where the venue's head of security was stationed near the main corridor, introduced himself using a name that made the man go very still, and requested access to the internal surveillance system. The request was granted in under 2 minutes. He reviewed 43 minutes of footage in the back office, standing, still in his coat. Marco stood beside him. Neither of them spoke during the playback. They didn't need to. The corridor footage showed Sophia being led toward the private lounge. The lounge itself had 2 cameras, one near the entrance, one above the vanity mirror. Both were working. Adrian watched the entire thing, all 4 minutes and 17 seconds of it. His face didn't change. That was the thing people misunderstood about him. They expected rage to look volcanic, explosive, loud. Adrian's rage didn't work that way. It worked the way deep water worked, silent on the surface, immense underneath, capable of swallowing things whole without a single ripple. When the footage ended, he asked for the clearest frames of each woman's face. "Names," he said. Marco already had his laptop open. "Give me 10 minutes. You have 5. He had all 4 names before he reached the car. Camille Harlow, Priya Wentworth, Jade Sutton, Becca Stroud. He recognized 2 of the surnames immediately, one from the foundation hosting tonight's gala, one from a media group his organization had dealt with previously. Old money, connected families, the kind of women who had grown up hearing yes so consistently that no had become a foreign language to them. He got into the car. Sophia was leaning against the window, scarf still wrapped around her head, pretending to look at the city lights passing outside. He didn't tell her what he'd seen. He didn't tell her he already knew their names. He simply reached across and took her hand, and she let him, and for the rest of the drive home, neither of them said anything. But somewhere on the highway, she spoke. "Promise me something." He looked at her. "Promise me you won't hurt anyone over this." She turned from the window. Her eyes were clear now, not tearful, not fragile, certain. "I know what you're thinking, Adrian. I know what you're capable of, but I don't want that. Not for this. Not for me." He was quiet for a long moment. "They humiliated you," he said. "I know." She turned back to the window. "And I want them to understand what that means. But not like that. Do it the way that actually costs them something." She paused. "Do it the way they can't recover from." Adrian looked at the road ahead. The corner of his mouth moved. Barely, almost imperceptibly. "Okay," he said. One word, quiet as a door closing. Somewhere across the city, 4 women were laughing, uploading a video, and toasting to a night they believed would have no consequences whatsoever. They had absolutely no idea who they had just invited into their lives. The video went live at 11:23 p.m. Adrian knew because Marco sent him a screenshot at 11:24. By midnight, it had 40,000 views. By 2 a.m., it had crossed 200,000. The caption read, "Surprise makeover for the uninvited guest." And the comments were exactly what you'd expect from strangers who only had 30 seconds of context and unlimited cruelty to offer. Laughing emojis, hair jokes, a few people calling it staged. Nobody, not a single person in those early hours, asking whether the woman in the video was okay. Adrian sat in his home office, with the door closed, and read every comment with the patience of a man cataloging evidence. Sophia was asleep down the hall. He'd made sure of that. Warm tea, the bedroom dark, her phone placed face down on the nightstand so the notifications wouldn't reach her before morning. She didn't know about the video yet. He intended to be the one to tell her, and he intended to do it only after he had something concrete to offer alongside the information. Not comfort, not fury, a plan. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls, short ones, the kind where he spoke less than 20 words total, and the people on the other end asked no questions. By 1 a.m., his 2 best investigators, a former intelligence analyst named Dara and a forensic accountant the organization simply called Priest, were already working. "I want everything," Adrian told them. "Not rumors, not assumptions. Everything verifiable." "Timeline?" Dara asked. "Yesterday would have been ideal," he said, and hung up. By Thursday morning, the first files began arriving. Adrian reviewed them at his desk, while Sophia slept in, something she rarely did. He read each document the way he read contracts, slowly, completely, looking for the weight hidden inside the fine print. Camille Harlow, 26. Daughter of Richard Harlow, founder of the Harlow Children's Foundation. The very gala where last night's assault had taken place. Irony so thick you could choke on it. Camille had a lifestyle blog with 400,000 followers, built almost entirely on purchased engagement. Priest had traced 3 separate payments to a follower farming service operating out of Eastern Europe. More interestingly, the foundation itself had a problem, a significant one. Charitable donation records filed publicly showed numbers that didn't match the private disbursements Priest had quietly pulled from a source Adrian didn't ask about. The gap was not small. The gap was the kind that made prosecutors interested. Priya Wentworth, 24, her father, Gerald Wentworth, owned the Wentworth Media Group, 4 newspapers, 2 digital outlets, and a television channel that had quietly shaped public opinion in this city for 30 years. Priya herself was less powerful, but considerably more reckless. Dara found a thread of deleted messages between Priya and a city councilman, messages that suggested she had passed him confidential advertising data from her father's company in exchange for a zoning decision that benefited a property Priya co-owned in the Arts District. It was textbook insider dealing. The deleted messages were not as deleted as Priya believed. Jade Sutton, 27, engaged to the son of a prominent pharmaceutical distributor. On the surface, clean. Underneath the surface, Dara found something more personal and considerably more explosive. Jade had spent the past 2 years anonymously running a social media account dedicated to destroying the reputations of women she considered social competition. The account had targeted 7 women. 2 of them had left the city entirely. 1 had been hospitalized briefly following an online harassment campaign the account had orchestrated. The connection between the anonymous account and Jade's personal devices was a single metadata error, the kind people made when they believed they were invisible. Becca Stroud, 25, the quietest one in the video, the one whose hands had held Sophia down. Becca's family was the least prominent of the 4. Her father ran a mid-sized construction company. But Priest found the company's books contained a very specific irregularity. Several city contracts awarded through a bidding process that, on paper, was competitive. Off paper, 2 of the competing bids had been submitted by shell companies that Priest traced directly back to the Stroud family itself. Bid rigging, municipal fraud, the kind of thing that carried serious prison time. Adrian closed the last file and leaned back in his chair. He didn't feel satisfaction, not yet. Satisfaction was a destination. He was still reading the map. What he felt was something colder and more useful: clarity. These women had believed they were untouchable because of who their families were. What they hadn't understood, what most people never understood until it was far too late, was that family names were shields, not armor. Shields could be knocked aside, and once they were, everything underneath was exposed. He was still sitting there when Sophia appeared in the doorway, wearing one of his sweaters, her short, uneven hair unbrushed, holding a mug of coffee with both hands. She looked at him for a moment, at the files on the desk, the quiet alertness in his posture, and something passed across her face. "You already know everything, don't you?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Enough," he replied. She walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Gray morning light, traffic just beginning to build. "The video's spreading," she said quietly. "Yes, people are laughing. For now," Adrian said. He turned back to his files. For now. Adrian had a rule he'd followed for 15 years. Never move fast when patience costs you nothing. Most people in his position, men who had the resources, the connections, and frankly the temperament to reduce someone's life to rubble overnight, made the mistake of moving immediately. Anger was a terrible strategist. It made noise, left evidence, and most importantly, it warned the target. A frightened target became a careful one. A careful target made mistakes harder to exploit. Adrian preferred a different approach. He waited 9 days. 9 days during which Camille, Priya, Jade, and Becca celebrated. The video climbed past 4 million views. Comment sections overflowed. 3 separate meme pages reposted the clip with increasingly cruel captions. A podcast dedicated an episode to it. 2 hosts laughing for 20 minutes about the woman who got a free haircut. The 4 of them gave an informal interview to a lifestyle blog, carefully worded, stopping just short of identifying themselves while making sure everyone who knew them knew it was them. They were famous now, in that particular shallow way the internet manufactured. They were untouchable, or so they believed. The first domino fell on a Tuesday. Camille Harlow woke up to 47 missed calls. Her lifestyle blog's biggest sponsor, a luxury French cosmetics brand called Éclat, that had paid Camille a substantial monthly retainer for 18 months, had terminated their contract overnight. No warning call, no negotiation, just a formal email from their legal team citing a morality clause embedded in the original agreement. Attached to the email was a document Camille had never seen before, a compiled record of private messages she had sent over the past 3 years. Messages to former friends containing racist remarks, body-shaming comments directed at other influencers, and a particularly vicious thread in which she had coordinated a harassment campaign against a small business owner who had left her a negative review. Camille stared at her phone and tried to remember who she had sent those messages to. The answer was, too many people. She called her lawyer. Her lawyer told her the messages appeared to have been obtained legitimately, forwarded by recipients rather than hacked. There was nothing actionable. She called her father. Richard Harlow listened to his daughter's panic and said very little, because he was dealing with his own problem. A financial regulator had made an unannounced inquiry that morning regarding the foundation's charitable disbursement records. Coincidence, he told himself. It was not a coincidence. 3 days later, Priya Wentworth's world developed a crack. It started small. A single investigative piece, published by an independent journalism outlet, that Adrian's team had fed information to anonymously, carefully, with the precision of people who understood exactly how much to reveal and exactly when. The article didn't mention Priya by name. It referenced a city councilman and an unnamed media heiress in the context of a zoning decision that had quietly benefited a private property investment. The city was small enough that people connected the dots within hours. By evening, 2 of the Wentworth Media Group's senior advertisers had reached out to Gerald Wentworth's office with questions. Gerald, a man who had spent decades controlling narratives, suddenly found himself inside one he hadn't written. He summoned Priya to his office. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Witnesses outside the door said it was not pleasant. Priya emerged with red eyes and a new lawyer. She still didn't know who had started it. Meanwhile, Sophia was rebuilding. She had found the women's shelter almost by accident. A friend of a friend had mentioned it, and Sophia, looking for somewhere to put the restless energy that grief and humiliation left behind, had walked in on a Wednesday morning and offered to help with whatever they needed. They needed someone to run an afternoon art workshop for residents. Sophia, who had studied design briefly before her life had taken a different direction, said yes without hesitating. The women she met there didn't know who she was. They didn't know her husband's name, or what he did, or what had happened to her at a gala 2 weeks ago. They knew her only as Sophia, the one who brought good coffee and didn't push anyone to talk before they were ready. She found that she liked being known that way. Adrian visited the shelter once, unannounced, standing in the doorway of the art room for a moment, without Sophia seeing him. He watched her help a young woman mix colors on a small canvas, both of them laughing at something he couldn't hear. He stood there for about 30 seconds before leaving quietly. He didn't tell Sophia he'd come, but that evening he made a private donation to the shelter that would cover their operating costs for the next 2 years. On the 9th day, Jade Sutton's engagement ended. Not because of anything Adrian had done directly. That particular domino had been wobbling on its own. But Priest had ensured that the right information about Jade's anonymous harassment account reached the right person at the right moment. That person happened to be the mother of Jade's fiancé, a woman who took reputation seriously and cruelty personally. The engagement ring was returned by courier. Jade called Camille, screaming. Camille was too busy dealing with her own collapse to answer. Becca Stroud watched all of it from a careful distance, telling herself she was the least involved, the least exposed, the least at risk. She was wrong, but she wouldn't find out how wrong for another few days, and by then it would already be too late. Nobody tells you what humiliation leaves behind when it goes. People assume it fades cleanly, that one day you wake up and the weight of it is simply gone, the way a bruise disappears without you noticing the exact moment it does. Sophia had believed that too, once. She had assumed that time and Adrian's quiet, methodical justice would eventually sand the edges off what happened in that lounge, until it no longer cut her when she thought about it. What she hadn't expected was that the humiliation wouldn't fade. It would transform. It was day 11 when Sophia finally looked at herself properly. Not a glance in the bathroom mirror before bed. Not a quick check before leaving the shelter. A real, unflinching look. Morning light, no makeup, standing in front of the full-length mirror in their bedroom, with her coffee going cold on the nightstand. The hair was still uneven. She'd been hiding it under scarves and loose buns, telling herself she was waiting for it to grow enough to fix properly. But standing there in the honest light of a Thursday morning, she understood that what she was actually doing was waiting for permission. Waiting to feel normal again before allowing herself to look like herself again. She set down her coffee. She picked up her phone and called the only hairdresser she trusted, a quiet woman named Rena, who worked out of a small salon 4 blocks from their apartment and had been cutting Sophia's hair for 3 years. Sophia had always gone in for trims, small ones. She'd been growing her hair since before she married Adrian, and had become quietly attached to the length of it in the way women sometimes did. Not vanity exactly, more like continuity, a thread connecting who she currently was to who she had always been. "Come in this afternoon," Rena said, without asking for details. She went alone. Adrian offered to send a car, and she said no. She took the subway like she used to, before Adrian's security team had strong opinions about that. Standing in the crowded car, with her scarf wrapped loosely around her head, watching a teenager across from her draw in a sketchbook with focused intensity. The drawing was of a woman with very short hair, bold, deliberate lines. The teenager didn't look up once during the entire ride. Sophia watched those lines take shape and felt something quietly shift inside her chest. At the salon, she unwrapped the scarf and sat in Rena's chair and looked at her own reflection with the same steady gaze she'd practiced that morning. "What are we doing?" Rena asked, comb already in hand. Sophia thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "Cut it properly," she said. "Short. Whatever works with what's left." Rena nodded once. The way professionals did when they understood, the assignment went beyond hair. She worked for 40 minutes in near silence, occasionally turning Sophia's head gently with 2 fingers. When she finished, she set down her scissors, stepped back, and said nothing, because nothing was necessary. Sophia stared at herself. The cut was close on the sides, slightly longer on top, swept back from her face in a way that was clean and deliberate and entirely, unmistakably her. Without the length she'd hidden behind for years, her face was different. More open, the line of her jaw, the set of her eyes, all of it visible now, unguarded. She looked, she realized with a start, like a woman who had decided something. "I love it," she said, and she meant it in a way that surprised her. She went straight to the shelter from the salon. The afternoon workshop that day had 7 women, ranging from 19 to 53, each carrying something heavy and specific that Sophia had learned not to ask about directly. She'd brought watercolor supplies this time, which prompted 3 of them to immediately declare they couldn't paint. "Neither can I," Sophia said cheerfully, tying on an apron. "That's not the point." One of the women, a 23-year-old named Lily, who rarely spoke during group sessions but always stayed late, noticed the hair first. She looked at Sophia for a moment across the table. "You cut it," Lily said. "They cut it," Sophia replied simply. "I just made it mine." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up a brush. It became the most talkative session they'd had. Adrian was home early that evening, which was unusual enough that Sophia noticed immediately. He was in the kitchen, which was even more unusual, attempting something with pasta that he would later describe as controlled. He turned when she walked in and went very still for a moment. She watched him look at her. Not the careful, worried look he'd been giving her for 11 days, checking for cracks. This was different. This was the look he'd given her on their wedding day, across a room full of people, when she'd walked toward him and he'd looked like a man who still couldn't quite believe his own luck. "You look," he started. "Don't make it weird," she said, stealing a piece of bread from the counter. He laughed. A real one, the kind she hadn't heard from him in nearly 2 weeks. She sat at the kitchen island and watched him cook, and thought about Lily picking up that brush this afternoon, and about the teenager on the subway, drawing bold lines without looking up, and about how transformation rarely announced itself. It simply arrived, and you either recognized it or you didn't. Camille Harlow had a system for crisis management. She had developed it over years of minor scandals, a poorly worded caption here, an unflattering candid there. And it had always worked. Step 1. Go quiet on social media for exactly 72 hours. Step 2. Reappear with something aspirational. A sunrise photo, a charity mention, something that reminded people she was fundamentally a good person. Step 3. Let the news cycle move on, because it always did. The system had one critical flaw. It assumed the crisis was finished creating itself. It started with a phone call between Camille and Priya on a Wednesday evening. A call that both of them believed was private, and neither of them knew was being passively documented through Priya's compromised work email, which Priest had been quietly monitoring for 6 days. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. In those 22 minutes, Priya told Camille something she had told nobody else. It had been her idea to bring the shears. Not a spontaneous decision, not something grabbed impulsively from a vanity drawer. Priya had planned it. She'd put the shears in Jade's bag before the gala, suggesting they pull a harmless prank on whoever looked like the easiest target that evening. Sophia had simply been unlucky enough to follow Camille into that lounge. "Nobody can prove that," Priya said on the call. "I know," Camille replied, "but Jade knows, and Jade is falling apart," Priya finished. "Which is a problem." It was indeed a problem, because Jade Sutton, recently unengaged, publicly humiliated by the slow collapse of her social circle, and privately furious at Priya for a role she now understood had been far more calculated than she'd been told, had started talking, not to journalists, not yet, to her own lawyer. Adrian received the transcript of the phone call Thursday morning. He read it twice, then he forwarded one specific section to his own legal team with a single instruction: preserve this carefully. The detail about the shears changed things meaningfully. What had been documented as a spontaneous assault now carried the weight of premeditation. That distinction mattered enormously in a courtroom. It was the difference between a moment of terrible judgment and a deliberate, planned attack on a woman who had done nothing except walk into the wrong room. He didn't call Sophia into his office to tell her. He filed the information away, like a card in a deck he was still building, patient, methodical, waiting for the moment the full hand was ready to be played. By Friday, the group chat the 4 women had shared for 3 years went silent. It had been named with the particular unearned confidence of people who found themselves funny, untouchables. 3 years of messages, birthdays, gossip, photographs, cruelty dressed up as humor, and now nothing. Camille had sent the last message 4 days ago. Nobody had replied. Becca was the one who finally broke the silence. She sent a single message at 11 p.m. on Friday night. "We need to talk. Not here. In person." Nobody responded until morning. Then Jade sent back 2 words: "Talk to your lawyer." Camille screenshot the exchange and sent it to her own lawyer without comment. Priya saw the screenshot because Camille had forgotten, or perhaps chosen not, to crop out Priya's name from the preview. Priya called Camille immediately. The call lasted 4 minutes and ended badly. By Saturday afternoon, Jade had filed a formal statement with her lawyer, distancing herself from the planning of the incident and placing the origin of the idea squarely with Priya. She didn't mention Becca in the statement. Not out of loyalty. Becca would understand that quickly enough. But because Jade's lawyer had advised her to keep the statement focused. Becca found out about Jade's statement secondhand, through a mutual acquaintance, on Saturday evening. She sat in her car in her own driveway for 30 minutes after hearing about it. Then she called her father. What Becca told her father during that call, Adrian's team didn't capture directly, but the consequence of it arrived Monday morning in an unexpected form. Becca's father contacted a crisis PR firm, the same firm, as it happened, that Richard Harlow had quietly engaged 2 weeks earlier for the foundation's regulatory problem. The firm's senior partner, a shop woman named Elise Mora, made an interesting discovery within her first hour of work. She was being asked to manage the fallout of the same incident for 2 different clients with increasingly conflicting interests. She made a phone call to both families. She told them plainly that she could not represent 2 parties in the same matter when their legal exposure was beginning to point at each other. She would need to choose one. She chose neither. She resigned from both engagements by Tuesday, and then, because Elise Mora had not survived 30 years in crisis communications by ignoring her instincts, she made one additional call. To a journalist she trusted, a thorough one, the kind who didn't publish anything without evidence. She didn't provide evidence herself. She simply asked a question. Have you looked closely at the Harlow Foundation's financials recently? She hung up before the journalist could ask how she knew. Across the city, without any of them realizing it, Camille, Priya, Jade, and Becca had stopped being a group and become 4 separate problems, each generating their own damage, each looking sideways at the others, each quietly calculating how much they were willing to sacrifice to protect themselves. The answer, it was becoming clear, was considerably more than friendship. The article published on a Monday, 6 a.m. The kind of timestamp that suggested the journalist had been sitting on it over the weekend, doing final checks, making absolutely certain every sentence was airtight before hitting publish. The outlet was mid-sized but respected. The kind of publication that politicians quietly feared because it had no major corporate ownership to pressure and no advertiser relationships valuable enough to protect anyone. The headline read, "Planned, not spontaneous, the truth behind the viral haircut prank that has millions laughing at the wrong person." Sophia found it before Adrian could tell her. She was awake early. She'd been sleeping better lately but still woke before 6 most mornings. A habit the past few weeks had carved into her without asking permission. She was at the kitchen island with coffee when her phone lit up with a message from Rena, her hairdresser. "Have you seen this? Read it. All of it." There was a link. Sophia read it once quickly, the way you did when something caught you off guard. Then she set her coffee down and read it again slowly. The article was thorough, in the way only genuinely good journalism could be. Not sensational, not rushed, but precise. It opened with the video, which by now had been viewed over 11 million times, but reframed it immediately. Rather than presenting it as entertainment, the journalist, a woman named Claire Voss, no relation to Adrian, Sophia noted distantly, treated it as evidence. She described what was visible in the footage frame by frame. Sophia begging them to stop, the shears, the laughter, the recording. Then came the part Sophia hadn't known. The article detailed, with supporting evidence, that the shears had been brought to the gala deliberately, that the target had not been predetermined, but the act itself had been planned as a group entertainment for the evening. Witness testimony from 2 gala staff members, people who had heard portions of the conversation in the corridor, confirmed that the women had discussed pulling a prank before Sophia had ever been approached. It named them, all 4, full names, photographs pulled from public social media, family connections clearly stated without embellishment. It didn't editorialize. It didn't need to. The facts, arranged carefully and attributed properly, did everything editorializing could never do cleanly. The article also included something Adrian's team had quietly ensured reached the journalist through the appropriate channels. A timestamp analysis of the original video upload, proving it had been posted publicly while Sophia was still in the building. They had filmed it, laughed over it, and published it before she had even reached the front steps. By 9 a.m., the article had been shared 80,000 times. By noon, every major news outlet had picked it up. The reframing was immediate and total. The internet, which had spent 3 weeks laughing at a woman with ruined hair, turned with the particular swift violence of a crowd realizing it had been cheering for the wrong side. Comment sections that had been full of hair jokes were now full of something rawer and considerably less funny for the 4 women involved. Camille's social media following dropped 60,000 in a single afternoon. Priya's father released a statement through the Wentworth Media Group expressing that the behavior depicted was inconsistent with the family's values. A statement so breathtakingly hollow that it generated its own wave of mockery. Jade said nothing publicly, on lawyers' advice. Becca deactivated every social media account she owned by 10 a.m., which was noted by approximately 200,000 people who screenshotted the empty profile pages before she could. What nobody had anticipated, not even Adrian, who had planned considerably more than he'd revealed, was Sophia. Because at 2 p.m. that Monday, Sophia posted something. Not a statement, not a carefully worded response drafted by a lawyer or a publicist. She didn't have either. She sat at the kitchen island in the same spot she'd read the article that morning, pointed her phone at herself, and recorded a 60-second video. She was wearing a plain white shirt. Her short hair was unstyled. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked directly into the camera with the steady, unhurried gaze of a woman who had already survived the worst of it and was no longer afraid of what came next. She said, "I don't know most of you. 3 weeks ago, you watched a video of something that happened to me and laughed. I don't say that to make you feel guilty. You didn't know. Neither did I know, when I walked into that room, what was about to happen. But I want you to see me now, not the woman in that video. This one, the one who cut her hair properly, who goes to work every morning at a place that helps women who've been hurt in ways much worse than mine, who is standing here in her kitchen, telling you that humiliation is only permanent if you let it be." She paused for exactly 1 second. "I'm not letting it be." She posted it without a filter, without a caption, without hashtags. By midnight, it had been viewed 34 million times. Adrian watched it from his office, where he'd been reviewing the legal files his team had spent 3 weeks assembling. He watched it 3 times. Then he put his phone face down on the desk and sat quietly for a long moment. He had spent weeks building something carefully calculated to dismantle 4 people. His wife had spent 60 seconds doing something he hadn't planned for and couldn't have engineered. She had made the whole city fall in love with her. And in doing so, she had made certain that whatever came next, in courtrooms, in newspaper columns, in the quiet deliberations of prosecutors reviewing files, the world would be watching, not laughing, watching. The meeting request came through lawyers. That alone told Adrian everything he needed to know about how far things had fallen for the 4 women. 3 weeks ago they had been untouchable, or believed themselves to be. Now they were communicating through legal intermediaries, requesting a private meeting with the careful, slightly desperate language of people who had finally understood the size of what was coming toward them. The request specified neutral ground. Adrian's legal team responded with a counterproposal. His corporate offices, downtown, Thursday at 2 p.m. Non-negotiable. They accepted within the hour. Adrian told Sophia about the meeting that evening over dinner. He placed the letter from their lawyers on the table beside her plate and waited while she read it. She read it twice. He'd learned that about her, that she always read important things twice. Then set it down and picked up her fork again. "They're scared," she said. "Yes? Good." She said it without satisfaction, which somehow made it heavier. Not gloating, just honest. "You don't have to be there," Adrian said. "I can handle it." Sophia looked at him across the table with an expression he recognized, the particular quiet certainty she had worn increasingly often in the past several weeks. The one that made him feel, not for the first time, that he had fundamentally underestimated who he had married. "I'll be there," she said simply, and returned to her dinner. Thursday arrived gray and cold. The 4 women came separately, which itself was telling. 6 weeks ago, they had moved as a pack, coordinated outfits, shared cars, the performative solidarity of people who mistook proximity for loyalty. Today, Each arrived in a different vehicle, accompanied by their own lawyer, careful not to make eye contact with each other in the lobby. Adrian's corporate offices occupied the 14th floor of a building that made no architectural apologies for its seriousness. Clean lines, dark wood, the kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but deliberate. The quiet of a space designed to make visitors acutely aware that the person who owned it held considerably more cards than they did. Sophia was already inside when they arrived, seated at the far end of the conference table beside Adrian. She wore a deep green dress, and her short hair was styled simply, swept back. She looked, several of the lawyers noted privately, entirely composed. Far more composed than their own clients, who filed into the room in various states of barely managed anxiety. Camille looked like she hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks, which was accurate. Priya sat rigidly upright in the way people did when they were using posture as armor. Jade kept her eyes on the table. Becca, the quietest one, the one whose hands had held Sophia down that night, sat at the end of the row and looked at Sophia once, just once, before looking away and not looking back. Adrian let the silence sit for a moment after everyone was seated. Then he opened a folder. He didn't raise his voice once during the 40 minutes that followed. He didn't need to. The documents did the work, assembled with the thoroughness of people who had spent weeks ensuring that every page was unassailable. Criminal complaints for assault, filed formally with supporting surveillance footage, witness statements, and the recorded phone call establishing premeditation. Civil lawsuits for damages, emotional distress, and defamation related to the public posting of the video. Regulatory referrals already submitted to the relevant financial authorities regarding the Harlow Foundation discrepancies and the Wentworth media dealings. Evidence packages prepared for the municipal fraud investigators concerning Stroud Construction's bidding irregularities. Documentation connecting Jade's anonymous harassment account to 2 women who had suffered measurable, documented harm as a result. Each lawyer received a copy simultaneously. The room was very quiet while they reviewed. Camille's lawyer leaned toward her and whispered something. Camille nodded once, stiffly, the way people nodded when the information they were receiving confirmed what they had already privately feared. "We chose this approach," Adrian said, when the initial review was complete, "because Sophia asked me to. She asked me not to make this about blood, or fear, or the kind of consequences that couldn't be taken back." He paused. "I want you to understand that honoring her request was a choice, not a limitation. Everything in those folders represents what mercy looks like from where I sit. What I'm capable of beyond that, I'll leave to your imaginations." Nobody spoke. He closed his own folder and looked down the table. "She has something to say," he said. Sophia didn't stand up. She didn't raise her voice either. She simply looked at each of them in turn, Camille, Priya, Jade, Becca, with the steady, unhurried gaze that 34 million people had seen in a 60-second video and found impossible to look away from. "I have one question," she said, "and I'd like an answer from each of you. Not your lawyers." The room was absolutely still. "Why?" she asked. "Not the legal version, not the version your lawyers helped you write." She paused. "I walked into that room and I didn't know any of you. You didn't know me, and you decided that hurting me was entertaining." She looked at each face individually. "I want to know why." The silence that followed was the longest kind. Camille opened her mouth once and closed it again. Priya looked at the table. Jade's eyes filled, though whether from remorse or consequence was genuinely unclear. Becca, the quiet one, the one whose hands Sophia could still feel sometimes on her shoulders in the half-second before sleep, looked up for the first time since sitting down and met Sophia's eyes directly, and said nothing. None of them said anything, which was, Sophia thought, the most honest answer she was ever going to get. She nodded once, Then she looked at Adrian. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Adrian stood. "Then we're done here," he said. "Months have a way of moving differently after something breaks you. They don't drag the way you expect them to. They don't blur either. They move with a kind of deliberate weight, each week distinct, each small change noticeable in a way that ordinary, untroubled months never were." Sophia noticed this about the 4 months that followed the conference room. She noticed how different Tuesday felt from the Tuesday before it. How progress, real progress, had a texture that was nothing like the dramatic transformation people described in stories. It was quieter than that, and considerably more permanent. Camille Harlow accepted a plea arrangement in the criminal assault case that her lawyer had spent 6 weeks attempting to avoid. The arrangement included a formal conviction, 200 hours of community service, and a financial settlement paid directly to Sophia that her legal team had negotiated without ever once requiring Adrian to be in the room. The Harlow Foundation, separately, entered into a compliance agreement with financial regulators. Richard Harlow stepped down from the board quietly, the kind of quiet that money and lawyers manufactured, though it fooled nobody who had been paying attention. Camille's lifestyle blog never recovered, not because anyone actively dismantled it. It simply became impossible to maintain the particular fiction that an influencer's platform required once the audience understood who was behind it. The 400,000 followers became 200,000, then 80,000, then a number too small to interest any brand worth approaching. She moved to a smaller apartment. She got a job at an interior design firm owned by a college acquaintance, willing to give her a second chance. Adrian's team left her alone after the settlement. There was nothing left worth pursuing, and they both knew it. Priya Wentworth's situation carried the longest tail. The insider dealings investigation moved at the pace such investigations always did, slowly, bureaucratically, with the particular grinding thoroughness of regulators who understood that a case built carefully was a case that held. Gerald Wentworth, after 3 meetings with his own lawyers and 1 exceptionally difficult conversation with his board, made the decision to settle the regulatory inquiry before it became a criminal referral. The settlement was substantial. It was also public, which was the part Gerald found hardest to absorb. A man who had spent 30 years controlling what other people read about him, now the subject of coverage he couldn't shape. Priya pled no contest to a related charge. Her sentence was probationary, her fine significant, her name attached permanently to a public record that appeared in the first results of any search engine query. She called Camille once, months later. Camille didn't answer. Jade Sutton's cooperation with investigators, offered early and documented thoroughly by her lawyer, earned her the most lenient outcome of the 4: community service. A formal apology required as part of her civil settlement that her lawyer drafted and she signed. The anonymous harassment account was traced, confirmed, and its history documented. The 2 women it had most severely targeted were informed, connected with legal resources, and offered a portion of Jade's civil settlement. One of them used the money to finish a degree she had abandoned during the worst of the harassment campaign. She sent Sophia a letter about it. Sophia kept it in the drawer of her desk at the foundation office and read it occasionally when the work felt heavy. Becca Stroud's father's company faced the most serious legal exposure of all: municipal fraud charges that moved through the system with the momentum of a case that prosecutors found straightforward and documentable. The company paid significant fines. 2 contracts were voided. The bid-rigging investigation expanded briefly before settling on the core charges. Becca herself cooperated fully. She was the first of the 4 to reach out to Sophia's legal team directly, bypassing the group dynamic entirely, and the first to offer a personal apology that wasn't filtered through lawyers or public relations firms. It came as a handwritten letter. Sophia read it twice. She didn't respond, but she didn't discard it either. The foundation opened on a Thursday. Sophia had spent 8 weeks working on it. Alongside 2 women from the shelter, a legal advisor Adrian had quietly connected her with, and Lily, the 23-year-old from the art workshop, who had picked up a brush on the afternoon Sophia came in with her new haircut, and who had since become, in the unhurried way real things became, a close friend. The Sophia Voss Foundation for Dignity and Recovery, named at Lily's insistence, over Sophia's objections, and Adrian's decisive tie-breaking vote. It offered legal support, counseling, and practical resources for women who had experienced public humiliation, online harassment, and image-based abuse. The initial funding came partly from the civil settlements and partly from a private donation so substantial that the foundation's accountant had called Sophia twice to confirm it was real. Adrian had made the donation anonymously. Sophia had known immediately anyway. The second gala of the year was held at the Meridian Grand Hotel on a Friday evening in early winter. Different foundation, different cause, same chandeliers. Adrian had suggested skipping it. Sophia had said no. She wore a deep burgundy dress, and her short hair, grown out slightly now, shaped carefully by Rena into something that was entirely and unmistakably hers. No scarf, no apology in her posture. She walked through the entrance beside Adrian, her hand in the crook of his arm, and if she felt anything, when the familiar lobby came into view, the marble floors, the string quartet, the chandeliers blazing above it all, she didn't show it. What she felt, privately, was something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not closure exactly, something simpler and more durable than either. She felt like herself, fully, finally, irrevocably herself. Adrian leaned down slightly as they crossed the lobby. "Okay?" he said quietly. She looked up at him. The man who had dismantled 4 lives without raising his voice or spilling a drop of blood. The man who had stood in a shelter doorway, watching her laugh with strangers, and driven home to make a donation she wasn't supposed to know about. The man who had sat across a conference table from the women who hurt her and let her be the one to ask the question that mattered most. "More than okay," she said. They walked in together, and this time nobody mistook her for anyone other than exactly who she was.